Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff with Fluent American checking in. We're going to be doing a quick look at a task two for the IELTS speaking test. And just some quick reminders about task two. So, again, when you take task two on the speaking test, you'll have 1 minute to prepare. They're going to give you a task card with a couple of questions written on it, as well as a piece of paper where you can take some notes. Now, the bullet points. So you'll see the main question followed by some smaller questions. So, for instance, here I put in the chat box, our main question is going to be describe a car journey that you took. That's the main question. And then you'll see some other shorter questions. So, for instance, where you went, why you went there, who was with you. Those little bullet point questions that you see, you don't need to answer those. Those are just to kind of help guide you in case you get stuck. So feel free to answer them. There's nothing wrong with answering them. In fact, they're there to help you. But if you do get stuck, they're not the main goal. The main goal is to answer that first question. Okay. Other things for task two that some students ask me about, sometimes they get a little bit stuck preparing. Some things to consider. You can give multiple answers. So, for instance, for this question, I could talk about maybe different car trips that I took. So, maybe a car trip that I took when I was younger, and maybe another one when I was older. And in fact, this kind of leads into my second strategy as well, is that you can kind of approach the question through time. This won't always work, but in general, for the questions, you could give like an answer from when you were younger, give an answer for like right now, and then maybe an answer for what you would expect in the future, maybe like a future plan. That's another strategy. A couple other things just about task two before we answer this. For task two, the goal is to try to speak for 2 minutes, but sometimes the 2 minutes may not be reachable or attainable. Okay, maybe you've said everything you need to say and it only took you 1 minute. You have the option of telling the examiner, okay, I'm done. That's it. That's all I want to say. You have that option. Nothing can stop you from that. What the examiner will do is the examiner will look at the time and they'll ask you, oh, can you tell me anything more about that? And then you can answer, no, that's really everything. And this will not necessarily lower your score. Now, you are taking a little bit of a risk. What's the risk? Well, what you're doing is you're giving the examiner a smaller sample size. Okay, so instead of giving the examiner a 14-minute interview, you're giving them probably what will be like an 11 or a 12-minute interview. So it's a little bit shorter. And that means that there's less information available to grade you. So you're making a gamble. You're basically saying, okay, even though I'm giving you less information, I think that the information I'm giving you is pretty accurate, precise, with good vocabulary. And if your gamble works out, then fine. Okay, if most of what you're saying is accurate and correct, you won't be punished for having a slightly faster test. That's not part of the grade. The only thing you're being graded on is your fluency, your pronunciation, your grammar, and your vocabulary. There's nothing about, task achievement or something like that. Okay. So it is a little bit of a gamble. If you make a lot of mistakes in your task two, it might be better to keep talking because then you can try to make up for those issues. Try to say some sentences that are grammatically accurate and sound. But if you're pretty confident in your response, it might be better to just end it and move on to task three. Another thing too is that, if you find that you're repeating yourself with your answer, it might also be good to kind of end your task too. If you repeat yourself too much, that's going to lower your fluency score a little bit. So that can kind of be your sign to stop talking in task two. Is that, oh, I already said that. I'm repeating myself. Let me just try to end this task. All right, so keep those things in mind. As I give my answer to this task too, feel free to also post some questions in the chat box or in the comments if you're seeing this later, and I'll try to respond to you as soon as I see it. All right, so again, we have this task two. So we're describing a car journey that we took, describing where we went, why we went there, and who we were with. Now, if you're practicing alone at home, this might be a good chance for you to kind of pause the video and then for 1 minute prepare your answer, and then for the next 2 minutes try to give your answer. Okay, and then play back again and listen to my own response, just in case you're looking for some practice. I'm going to go right for it. So I'm going to describe a car journey that you took, where you went, why you went there, who was with you. All right. And let me also start my time. So I'm starting at 5 minutes exactly. Great. So we'll try to end in about 7 minutes. All right. So a car journey that I took was right after college. So it was right after I graduated. And my wife was in my graduating class with me. We were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. And we knew that she was doing a program with Teach for America. So it's possible that she was going to be placed down in San Antonio, Texas. So that means we needed to take a very, very long drive across the US. Because basically we were in Ohio and we needed to make it down to Texas. And those are pretty much like polar opposite sides of the country. So we planned our journey and we figured out it's going to take probably about 22 hours. So we figured that we would need to make a couple of stops. So in fact, we did. We stopped in Arkansas, in Little Rock, um, going down, and then we made it the rest of the way to San Antonio. And during this car drive, I mean, it was obviously mostly highways. My wife had just gotten a new car, so this was kind of our way to break it in a little bit, get used to it. And we made it down to San Antonio and we checked out a couple of things. We checked out in San Antonio. What did we see? We actually drove along a lot of the streets when that we would see again when we moved to the city a little bit later. We also got to check out the University of Texas at San Antonio. This would actually end up being the school that I would attend for my master's degree for teaching English as a second language. So we actually got to see the campus. The campus was crazy because it had like a lazy river. So like instead of like just like an outdoor swimming pool, which it also had that. The gyms it had were enormous. In terms of architecture, wasn't really my favorite. It was a lot of kind of brutalism architecture, so like lots of concrete, or relatively modern looking. But yeah, that was our drive. Right. And again, so that's right about the 7 minute mark. So the examiner would probably cut me short right around there. Again, if you have questions about this type of answer, this type of task, feel free to post it. Let's do a couple of real quick task 3 questions as well. That would be similar to this. So again, describe car journey. It's like how common, let's do a question like this. How common is it for people in your country to travel try to answer a question like that. So I would say in the US, I think the US is pretty well known for using cars, although I do think a lot depends on the part of the country that you're referring to. So for instance, if you're talking about the East Coast, which is the older part of the country, there's I think there's a stronger infrastructure there, especially in terms of like public transportation. A lot of your major cities, especially your older ones. So, for instance, you're looking at Boston, New York, Philadelphia, even DC to a degree. A lot of these older cities already have in place strong public transportation systems, including your subways, bus systems, but also your subway lines and even trolleys, like in the case of Philadelphia and I think Baltimore also to a degree. Um, so in your older cities, especially on your East Coast, you're more likely to find pretty solid public transit systems, although the systems tend to be a little bit dated. Whereas if you travel out west, a lot of those cities started expanding right after World War II. With you get the boom of the automobile industry and also the gas and oil industries as well. There was a lot of incentive to build more highways. So naturally, in those cities, what you see is a lot more sprawl. So you see a lot of cities that take up these huge amounts of land that pretty much require cars to access. And so, yeah, especially if you're living, in the South or pretty much anywhere west of, I would say, Pittsburgh, it's much more likely that you will need a car to get around. There are exceptions, for instance, like Chicago, but for the most part, yeah, most places you're going to in the United States, if you're not on the East Coast, you'll probably need a car. All right, I do need to head out and prepare for a class. But if you guys, again, like I mentioned before, if you have questions about task 1, task 2, task 3 for speaking test, or also for the writing test, be sure to let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys in a future video. Thank you so much for your time. Hope you guys have a good day, have a good night, and a good afternoon. I will see you later. Take care.